Hello, my name's David Burton, and I'm a community development specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. I'm your trainer today about the Engage Neighbor principles, and these principles are designed to help you have a healthy neighborhood relationship with those that are living around you. Now, these can apply to an individual that's living in an apartment complex or living in an urban or rural setting, or even someone who's a new first-time home owner. These principles really get to the basics of what we call the Engage Neighbor program, and we believe these fit in with what the current research is showing about how things have changed in American society and how we interact with our neighbors and the impact that is having on our society. But you can be a part of turning that around. And so we're going to go through these principles. You should have some paperwork with you that you can kind of fill in some blanks as you go along through this study to help you stay engaged and give you something to refer back to. These are really simple items. I know there's a lot of them, but I think you'll find in your daily routine of life that these can become a habit and an easy thing to incorporate into your life. So let's begin with the PowerPoint. And again, these are based on the Engage Neighbor principles, and we want to encourage you to take our survey, be a part of the Engage Neighbor pledge drive that we have underway. Our goal is to have 100,000 people take this pledge by 2030, and you can scan this icon and take that pledge today. And I'll share this again at the end of our presentation. Well, for some introductory comments, let's just talk a little bit about how this idea of neighboring has changed. It's changed even in my own lifetime. Growing up in our house, my mom always had a pound cake in the kitchen under glass, and my brother and I had strict orders never to touch it. And that was because this was there for neighbors, you know, neighbors who would actually come by unannounced to visit. And oddly enough, when they dropped by unannounced, we were actually glad to see them. We were glad that people came by to visit, and, having some pound cake, having some Sanka. This was the start of those neighboring conversations that would take place in kitchens. My grandmother was also a master of this. She always had a pot of coffee on all day long for people who had come by and visit. Well, now I think this image represents how we think of neighboring more. I jokingly say that when the doorbell rings at our house, we all turn off the lights and hit the floor. And we peek out the blinds, to see, is it UPS or is it someone selling Girl Scout cookies? We might, open the door to that. But you just don't get too many of those unannounced visits from neighbors. Well, a lot has changed over the years. From the 1950s to 2016, neighboring looks very different. And we see that sort of anecdotally, stories that people tell about how they interacted with their neighbors. But we do have a couple of sets of research that help guide us. We have a study that was done in the 1950s that showed a very high percentage, almost 70% of Americans said they engage socially with their neighbors once a week. So there was a high level of social engagement. You saw people talking about their neighbors in ways that tied back to social connection. You would watch each other's children, for example. You would maybe have people over for game night, take care of something, or loan out a cup of sugar, perhaps. And then we've seen that kind of change over the years to the point in 2016. I actually read a book that they were just saying this from observation, saying it seemed as though Americans were saying the very best neighbor was someone who is quiet and leaves us alone. And when I read that, it caught my attention. We have since completed a research study in Missouri, scientifically valid research study with 2,000 participants. We call it the state of neighboring. And one of our questions, we gave people 30 criteria to pick from asking them which of these criteria makes someone a good neighbor. And the two top vote getters on that survey were quiet and respects my privacy. Or in other words, Americans now say, or Missourians at least, say a good neighbor is someone who's quiet and leaves me alone. Well, that is very different from what it has been in the past. That's also more of a posture of isolationism, which contributes to other problems. It's a position of not trusting people that are around you. It's really not a position that's best for our health, for our neighborhood, or for our community. And we can talk about this for a long time. There's lots of research on this topic now that's showing the price that we're paying for isolation, that isolation and actually leads to less um, participation in local government, reduced friendships, lead to less civic participation, things that used to be the secret behind the success of our republic and our society. So a lot has changed over the years, and you'll sometimes hear me say, no more good neighbors, because good has become to mean someone who's quiet and leaves me alone. So instead, I've been trying to say we need more engaged neighbors. And that's where our principles come from that we'll talk about this evening. So for this class, let's kind of define what we're talking about when we talk about neighboring. It is the art and skill of building relationships with people who live in the closest proximity to you. Sometimes I use a tic-tac-toe sort of board and say it's those 8 properties, 8 apartments or 8 homes that adjoin your property. Those are your neighbors. Those are the ones you should concentrate on. Now, neighbors could be more. It could be, other people in the neighborhood as well, but it should never be less than those 8 that adjoin your property. Now, all the current research and writing that's taking place around this topic of being an engaged neighbor really centers on some very specific reasons why we don't connect more as a neighbor. Again, this epidemic of loneliness is a factor. When people are lonely, they're less likely to reach out and build connections with those around them. Again, this fairly new American phenomenon that our home is our retreat, that's leading to more isolation. And, having a fortress of solitude is great for Superman. It's not so great for us. We do need social connections. Also, entertainment. There's more entertainment options inside the house, which leads people to stay in the house more. People cite busyness of schedule. Really, there's a lot that goes into that. We tend to overcommit ourselves, overschedule ourselves. We no longer seem to prioritize downtime or even time with others. And those are all things that contribute to this sense of busyness, as does smartphones and electronics. When we're always checking for messages, it leads us to feel like we're always busy. There is also this tendency of people to be afraid of the mess. They're afraid of what may be going on in the other house or what problems may exist there, and they're afraid to get involved in that, even when they don't actually know the neighbor. And for some families, there's shame about what is taking place in their own household that they don't want others to see. And one author actually sums all these things up and says the one word that fits for all of this is selfishness, that we spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves and being selfish with our time. So this is kind of an overview of some reasons why people do not neighbor any longer. But neighboring has a tremendous amount of benefit for our health and for our community. It improves your place attachment and how you feel about the community in which you live. It can improve your actual quality of life. It can improve how long you live by being socially connected with those around you. It can improve your overall health. Being connected with those neighbors around you can reduce crime in your neighborhood by 60%. It actually provides a community benefit. People who have friends among their neighbors are more likely to be civically involved. It grows your social capital which actually can add to your bottom line. It's sort of this idea of who do you know, connections that lead to a benefit socially. But that is really sort of the grease that gets our society moving. Activity within your neighborhood actually leads to developing local leaders, people that get connected, realize they have some leadership abilities, or someone who is in the neighborhood that they could support as a leader, and that's equally important. One author says the very number one reason for being connected with your neighbors is to prevent future problems. It's a lot easier to have that conversation with a neighbor about a barking dog if you are already connected in a relationship before the barking dog became an issue. I think also you'll find that being connected with neighbors is fun. And for some people, loving their neighbor is actually a calling, and love is an active word. Hate is not the opposite of love. Apathy is. And when we say we're going to be quiet and leave our neighbors alone, that really is a picture of apathy, not a picture of love. So let's go over these engaged neighbor principles. Again, you have a handout in front of you. I think these are principles that really help us be the very best neighbors we can be, and will help your neighborhood as well. And we'll go through these pretty quickly. I know it's hard to watch a video. I appreciate your attention today. All right. Well, number one principle, learn and use my neighbors' names. There is nothing that a person loves to hear more than their name. And there is a big difference between yelling at your neighbor across the street to get their attention and saying, "Hey, Matt," versus, "Hey, you." One of them is personal, one of them has meaning, and we need to learn and then find ways to use those neighbors' names. You may just want to use a tic-tac-toe board. You may want to use a chart like this that we have on our website that you can download. And when you're first getting to know your neighbors, I encourage you to use something like this. And when you learn their names, write their names down in these squares. Put it in a place where you'll see it over and over so you can remember their names and then find ways to use their names. This can be a handy tool for writing in their phone numbers or other contact information as well to help you remember that. Again, learn names, use names. Principle number one, I will practice hospitality and eat with my neighbors. Nothing builds a connection like meeting over a dinner plate or a meal, even if it's on the driveway, even if it's just hot dogs, even if it's just cookies and coffee. This eating builds connections with humans, and practicing hospitality is not about a big fancy meal. It's about building connections, hearing the other person's story. There's even a podcast on this called Hospitality Matters. There's other resources as well. But hospitality is about caring and connections. It's not about being fancy 7-course meal. I will listen first and talk second with my neighbors. We all need to practice the skill of listening, to hear our neighbor's story, to help us understand where they're coming from, help us understand how they see things, and finding ways in that where we can connect, find out what their interests are. But always listen first, talk second. That's a great way to demonstrate that you care and that you're paying attention, and you will learn interesting things. I had a neighbor that I had not spoken to in 15 years. I didn't know his story. When I saw him, he always looked like he was cranky or upset. I saw him out in the yard. So I began to kind of make up this own narrative in my mind about what his story should be. And then I had an occasion to actually sit down and have coffee with him when I decided that I need to be doing better and engaging with my neighbors. And I discovered that my neighbor was a Vietnam War vet. He did a number of tours. He was wounded a number of times. He actually was awarded 4 different Purple Hearts. And his being drafted into the war and being in Vietnam changed the trajectory of his life as well. And he still has PTSD. He still has health issues. He doesn't sleep a lot. I mean, there are physical reasons for why he doesn't look too happy sometimes. But in hearing his story, I gained a real appreciation for what he had gone through. And I also heard about the things that he's passionate about and gave us things that we could talk about. So lend a listening ear, you'll learn a lot. I will do more front yard living to be available for conversations and service. Just being present in your front yard, being visible, leads to conversations and connections. How many times have I heard people say, I don't know anybody in that house. I never see them out. Maybe you've had that type of experience too. Maybe it means when you go to the mailbox, just lingering at the mailbox for a while to to see someone or make a connection. Maybe it just means um, we used to do dinner on the driveway on Fridays in a lawn chair. I was always amazed at the number of people that would stop and just have short conversations and catch up because we were available and we had a posture of like being available and being interruptible. So do more front yard living. Open yourself up to service and conversations. These are my neighbors that moved in across the street from me. I was in my front yard the day that they showed up to see the house they had bought. And because I was there, I went over and introduced myself and was able to answer a lot of their questions about the school and trash service. And they have said time and time again what a huge impact that made on them, what a difference that made in their life. And it only happened because I was trying to practice more front yard living. I will discard a lifestyle of busyness in favor of being present and available. You see that kind of in the idea of front yard living. Um, we are busy because we overcommit. Sometimes we overcommit and say yes to too many things because it helps us feel important and needed. And then we get in this position, this lifestyle of busyness where we're always bouncing from one thing to another, and there's never enough time to do other things or just to be relaxed. We have to adopt an attitude of just being present and available. It is okay sometimes to be bored. It is okay to not have something scheduled. Dropping this idea of busyness can open us up to being available to neighbors. I heard one person say, create a I will stop doing list and put neighbors on your to-do list. It's the same sort of idea, dropping the busyness. Maxwell King was the author of The Good Neighbor, which is the endorsed autobiography about Mr. Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I asked him when I had a chance to interview him, what was the number one thing he had learned from his research and interviews into Mr. Rogers? And he said it was about the tremendous value of being patient, of deliberately, intentionally, and thoughtfully slowing yourself down. That was a real key to who Fred Rogers was and how he lived his life. Deliberately slowing yourself down. I will remember important neighbor etiquette to help create cultures of trust. Many neighborhoods have some etiquette that come along with the culture of that neighborhood, but there are also some other things that we see in our own research that are things that really get people's attention, either good or bad etiquette, like parking. Are your cars all over the road blocking traffic, or are you parking cars in your front yard? Those are kind of etiquette things that are not good. They are not conducive to being an engaged neighbor. It could mean picking up after your dog when you take them on a walk. Not doing that does not meet etiquette standards and is not something your neighbors want to see happening. So kind of being in tune with what the etiquette is of your neighborhood and what it is that people want to see from our own research. This idea of being quiet is part of etiquette, but that can also mean not mowing your yard at 6:30 in the morning, not honking your horn every time you leave your house and every time you pull in. I remember seeing that on the list. But also it means being available to watch out for your neighbor's property. If their garage door's open, or if you see somebody out that shouldn't be there, letting them know. It means taking care of your own property, keeping a tidy front yard and maintaining your house so that it's tidy. It means watching out for your neighbor's personal safety. It can mean checking in on elderly neighbors. A lot of things on here that are elements of etiquette in your neighborhood, and be aware of those. I will focus on what is strong, not what is wrong in my neighborhood. This is an idea that comes from asset-based community development. And the intention here is that we focus on the positive. We focus on our strengths, and we gear our activities and our focus toward those strengths. Unfortunately, humans have a very well-exercised muscle that helps us spot everything that's wrong. But people don't want to talk about that all the time. And doing so can drive people away, cause people to be less involved in their neighborhood. We need to focus on what the strengths are, what your neighbor's gifts and strengths are, what your own gifts and strengths are. This is one of the principles of asset-based community development. And there's actually an organization called the Hopeful Neighborhood that has some tools that, if you're really, really interested in this and going further, then it can help you learn the gifts of your neighbors and help you discover ways that you all can work together based on your gifts. And that really is this idea of asset-based community development. I will invest my time and my talent in a homeowners or neighborhood association. If you live in an area where there is either one of these, you should be involved. Yes, it takes time. Yes, sometimes there are problems. Yes, some people are easier to get along with than others. And yes, sometimes homeowners associations put an overemphasis on rules. I would say both of these, homeowners and neighborhood associations, need to focus more on building social connections than on enforcing rules. But at the very least, you could be involved with these associations, helping plan social events. Maybe it's potluck for a street. Maybe it's other types of social get-togethers. But be involved and be part of the change that you want to see by building connections and be involved in your homeowners or neighborhood association. They need you. You can do things within an association that are social engagement. In our neighborhood, we started a 4th of July parade for kids. It's been extremely popular. People love getting together. We have done, and other neighborhoods have done, just sort of driveway chats. Bring a chair, bring your own snacks, and visit with your neighbors. And it can be a wonderful engagement opportunity. We saw ours grow over the course of the summer to very little participation to high levels of participation. Next, I will express gratitude for my neighbors by performing spontaneous, kind deeds or lending a strong back. Nothing says you care like reminding people that you've been on their mind for the day, or that you really appreciate how they keep up their yard, or you appreciate something about them or something they have done for others. Maybe that's just a handwritten note left at their door. Maybe it is, well, just as I was recording this video, in fact, one of my neighbors rang the doorbell and gave us a plate of cinnamon rolls. He just said they decided to make a double batch. They wanted to share some with us because today was National Cinnamon Roll Day. And that's just kind of a fun thing. A made up holiday, but it caught his eye and he thought, man, I'm going to make those and share them. That is a nice, spontaneous, kind deed to say to your neighbor, hey, you're important to me. And those things go a long way toward building relationships. I know of another lady who their family does a coffee bar in their garage once a month. It's free coffee for all the neighbors to get the neighbors together and connected and visiting. We did this in our garage for Missouri Good Neighbor Week. We did a coffee social. We had 35 neighbors show up. Most of them stayed for quite a while. A few brought their own lawn chairs, sat around, visited, had coffee together. It was not a very expensive or difficult thing to put together, and it was a great connection event. And you may be able to find something that you have a shared interest with neighbors on that you can organize and do, occasionally with the seasons or once a month that helps get people together. Do something you love. I will commit to learning the gifts and talents of my neighbors and the assets in my neighborhood. Take a minute and just think, or next time you're out on a walk around your neighborhood, look at what are the assets in your neighborhood. I mean, we often take these assets for granted. You have paved roads, you have sidewalks, you have fire hydrants that work. Do you have a lake or a stream or a field where people can play? Do you have street lights that work? Do you have some nice trees or shaded areas? Are there any benches? Is there a trail or a park nearby? I mean, these are things that we can often take for granted, but they are assets. And it may be that you can do something focused on those assets that help draw people together. And at the same time, you have neighbors who have gifts and talents. I just discovered this past year, we've done a mural and an art project in our neighborhood, and had somebody new moving down the street. I just discovered that they actually have a degree in drawing, and so they have a real talent that they can contribute to these annual sort of art projects that we try to do. But try to do things geared toward what people's talents are. Willie Lyles is a neighbor of mine. Willie is a state and national champion in gourd painting. Didn't even know it was a thing, right? Here's some of his art. So find ways for Willie to apply his talent and skills with what we're doing is very important. It keeps him engaged, and it's a unique skill set. All right, another one of our principles. I will help to set neighborhood priorities and pursue the common good where I live. Remembering this idea of pursuing the common good. That's what the focus needs to be on, not always what is best for my yard or what is best for my house, what is best for my neighbors collectively. And if you can set priorities and communicate that in a way that others have that sort of mindset, you'll have a much more engaged neighborhood and a much more happy relationship with your neighbors. And sometimes it looks like things like this, like a mural that gets redone once a year. It adds some color to a neighborhood. There were several neighbors who were artists. They wanted to do something together, and this is what they come up with. And the middle sign changes with the season. It's a fun thing to do, and again, it adds color and beauty to a neighborhood. But it's because there were people with shared gifts and shared interest. I will celebrate the neighboring holidays. Believe it or not, there are several of these, and some of them are national. Some of them, if you're in Missouri, are unique to Missouri. National Good Neighbor Day is on September 28th. There's a corresponding website, and if you do an act of neighboring, they ask you to put your zip code in, and you can see it truly is a national effort. And this was signed into law by Jimmy Carter in 1976. National Good Neighbor Day is a actual legitimate holiday. And if you live in Missouri, we have a Good Neighbor Week. This was signed into law in 2022, signed by our Missouri governor after it was passed by the legislature. And it begins on National Good Neighbor Day, the 28th, and continues through October 4th. There's a corresponding website, MissouriGoodNeighborWeek.com. There's always activities and things going on. They encourage you to report your act of neighboring during that week, to make plans to do something with your neighbors, and to nominate someone that you think is one of Missouri's most engaged neighbors. It's a way to really build conversation around this idea of being an engaged neighbor. That effort, Missouri Good Neighbor Week, actually was named the Program of the Year for Neighborhoods USA in 2023. So check out the website, see what we're doing, find ways to get involved during that. At the very least, do something kind for your neighbors during Missouri Good Neighbor Week. This was in 2022, our first year. Participation was all over the state. I can tell you that in 2023, we have more than doubled participation from the previous year and have many more dots over the state of Missouri. So participate in one of those existing holidays. Check yourself to see if you're being motivated when it comes to neighbor relationships by love, kindness, and mutual respect. Don't be motivated by greed or envy or wanting to get back at somebody. Love, kindness, and mutual respect go a long way toward developing positive neighbor relationships. Sometimes it means you might have to swallow a little bit of pride. Sometimes it means You're going to have to look at an issue a little differently, perhaps, but always approaching that with love and kindness and mutual respect uh, helps develop positive relationships. And it also can lead to service projects, and some neighborhoods approach it from that way. Susan Peck in Maplewood gets some ladies together once a month. They make casseroles, they freeze them, they give them to a food pantry that makes them available to people who are in need or have had a baby or have had surgery. Uh, they do that out of love and respect for their neighbors and a way that they can help. So an example of how you might apply those things. There's something called Lasagna Love. It's a national organization. You can actually sign up and make a lasagna, deliver them to a neighbor or someone in your area that has a need, that has requested a lasagna. That's a fun way to participate. And again, Missouri Good Neighbor Week examples here of just delivering cookies to first responders or flowers and things to a neighbor to say thank you. I will pursue reconciliation, offer forgiveness, and give my neighbors the benefit of the doubt when conflicts arise. Now, there's a whole lot that goes into this, right? We could talk for a long time about how to pursue reconciliation and how to offer forgiveness. But in the long run, it also benefits you. It benefits your health and your stress levels. When you work toward reconciliation, it strengthens a relationship. And when you offer forgiveness, you are doing the right thing. You are prioritizing relationships over maybe being right. So I think of this example in the city of Republic. A young lady had written me about how she got ticketed for having her grass be too high. And the situation was she was actually pregnant and isolated on bed rest in her 8th month. And her husband worked a second shift job. So by time, lots of times he, uh, was getting home to sleep while the sun was out going to work when it was dark. Um, and their mower was not working at the time, she said. And so she got this ticket. At first, she was really mad at her neighbors for someone turning them in for high grass when she was pregnant and bedridden. But then it dawned on her. She said, we've actually done nothing to connect with our neighbors. None of them may have even known I was pregnant. We know none of our neighbors by name. So it goes both ways. They had done nothing to build those connections. And, the neighbors apparently had not either. But she was hopeful that if some of her neighbors had known their situation, that someone would have mowed the yard for them to help instead of turning them in for a ticket. So something to keep in mind. How can you show kindness toward your neighbors? How can you help resolve a dilemma that they may be facing? Be a continual learner about neighboring and asset-based community development. I have a blog that I'll have a link to here at the end, the We Are Neighbors blog. I've got a list on there of literature, books along the topic of neighboring. You may want to read some of those. I recommend, being a continual learner on what it means to be an engaged neighbor and the ideas that go with asset-based community development. I think it makes all of us a better neighbor. And there is something, a class I do once a month. We have a different guest speaker on. It's called Neighboring 101. And you can enroll in that on the MU Extension website. And if you can't attend live, you can listen to the recording when you get it sent to you on email. And these guests are all talking about principles and ideas that help improve neighbors and neighborhoods. That's a way to be a continual learner. I'd really recommend enrolling in that class right away. If you're in Missouri, we also do something called Neighborhood Leadership Academy. It's every fall. And it's a great way. It's a 10-week session to learn more about how to be a leader, and specifically how to be a leader and develop a project right in your neighborhood. And you get support to do that, sometimes financial help to even do a project in your neighborhood. I will find ways to include neighbors in my life who are overlooked, marginalized, disabled, widowed, or lonely. You have neighbors that fall into these categories. People that are overlooked and not included, widows, especially. I have 3 on my street that I know of. and they need to be checked on. They may need help getting batteries in their smoke detectors. They may need help replacing light bulbs, and that's a good thing to do. Uh, it's a good way to build connections, but it also provides a service. And for any of these, people who are overlooked, marginalized, disabled, widowed, or lonely, they often feel left out. They're not included in regular activities. So if you do an event, even if you're on the driveway, be sure they know about it. Be sure you're inviting them and doing what you can to get them included. But there's another way to look at this too. I have neighbors. His name is Chin, and they wanted a turquoise table, which is the color of friendship. It's sort of a national movement. Turquoise tables go on the front yard. They're meant to be a gathering place for neighbors and a sort of a symbol that this is a place you can stop and have conversation and build connections. And they wanted a turquoise table in order to build connection with their neighbors. I will share honestly about myself and my family, our hurts and our successes. So many times in social media, what we see is everyone's highlights, the best things that are going on in their house. And that's not really life. And we all have hurts and pains. We all have problems that we're facing. Being honest about those, sharing those, and maybe one of your neighbors has had the same type of experience, that they can relate to having a family member with cancer, to having to face other challenges, maybe with the child. Don't be afraid of sharing those. And when you do, share honestly about them. I think you'll find mutual respect and support among people, because you're going to probably find a neighbor who's had a similar experience, and they may have some wisdom and advice to give you that'll help you get through that situation. It's another one of our principles. Peter Lovenheim, who wrote the book In the Neighborhood, says traditionally individual survival was impossible. You depended on others in your village for support. But in Western culture, we think we can survive alone. This idea is sometimes why we don't share about our hurts, because we're just going to be tough and take care of it ourselves. And that is not the best course of action. I will not turn my neighbor into a project or gossip about my neighbors. Zero tolerance for gossip. When a neighbor tells you something in confidence, it has to stay in confidence. Do not break that confidence if you want to be an engaged neighbor who has healthy neighbor relationships. And don't turn your neighbor into a project. If you think there's something about them that needs to be fixed, don't make it in your mission in life to fix them. That generally does not turn out well either. So these are two warnings that are part of the engaged neighbor principles. Don't make a neighbor a project. Do not gossip about your neighbors. And really, being an engaged neighbor, the bar is set pretty low. I'm reminded of some neighbors that have moved into my neighborhood. I'd only met them once. I knew that he was getting ready to have a surgery. I knew when he had his surgery, we got a snowstorm. And so I went down the street with a shovel. I shoveled their driveway and sidewalk. It was not that big of an area. When I got done, she was on the porch with a hot cup of chocolate. She told me how they had moved 14 different times during his work career. They'd lived in lots of different places, and that I was the best neighbor they'd ever had. And so I have to tell you, when she told me that, my chest kind of puffed up, and I walked back to the house with a little extra spring into my step, until I realized that that was only the second time I'd ever spoken to her, and it was the only thing I had ever done for them. And that qualified me as the best neighbor they'd ever had. So they lived a lot of places where they had zero connection with neighbors. So I think the bar is set very low. That doesn't mean you're off the hook, but it does mean that doing kind gestures, developing these connections, really leads quickly to strong neighbor relationships. I will invite my neighbors into my regular routine and exercise a +1 approach to daily living, neighboring. So you don't have to just always plan special things. This is not like I'm going to host a block party every week. That's not what's behind these neighborhood principles. It's really about having a regular routine and involving your neighbors with you. If you go for a walk, invite a neighbor to come with you. If you're going to go to a movie, don't go by yourself. Invite a neighbor to go with you. I mean, invite neighbors into your routine, your walk of life, to include them, to start building those connections. We have a principle that we follow. It's called +1 approach. I try never to let a day go by without having some sort of positive neighbor connection. whether it's a conversation I had when I was out walking my dog or something that comes up during the day. Try and have at least one positive neighbor connection every day of some sort. And if you're getting toward the end of the day and you haven't had one, then make a phone call or send a text. Have some sort of connection. It's an ongoing process. Neighboring is like a crock pot. It's not a microwave. You got to have it on. It's got to percolate. It's got to keep going on a regular basis. And I sometimes say when it comes to neighborhoods, I can't do anything that'll change Washington, D.C. I can't do much of anything that ever would change my state capital, but I can do something every single day that impacts my neighbors and neighborhood. This is where I live. Because of proximity, I can do something here every day that's positive for those that live around me. And the benefit of that rubs off on me. I'm as much a recipient of that as a server going out. So +1 approach, have it on your mind each and every day. I will not be afraid to celebrate what it means to be an engaged neighbor. Tell other people about the Engaged Neighbor program. Tell other people about the principles and what it is you're trying to do. Celebrate what it means to be an engaged neighbor. Do not encourage isolation or being in your home and thinking that's the same thing as being a good neighbor. Whether it's chalk art festivals or whether it's other events, that you can just involve your neighbors with you in your regular routine, and then talk about why that's important. Why is it important that we've connected as neighbors over chalk art? Why is it important that we keep doing that? So again, take the Engaged Neighbor Pledge. You can find it at engageneighbor.com as well. Or if you're in this class, you have a handout that you filled in. Keep those items close to you that you can see regularly and are reminded by them. So I had mentioned websites. The engageneighbor.com is a great way to get connected with me, to subscribe to our email newsletter so you have more information coming, or to take that pledge. That's probably the place to start. Our emails for this program go out about every 2 weeks. It's always got interesting articles and videos, things on this idea of being an engaged and connected neighbor. And I would encourage you to look at those as well. So hopefully, as you use these engaged neighbor principles and apply them in your own life, you're going to have better, stronger relationships around you as a neighbor. And I think that's the very best thing we can do to train someone about what it means to be a neighbor. It's really about relationship. It's really about connection. And we do more of that, our lives and our neighborhood, and ultimately our nation will be a better place to live. So thank you for participating and being part of this class. I'll have my contact information in the description of this video as well. Always glad to hear from participants and always happy to see other people signing on to the pledge. Thank you.